What's good, YouTube? What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to another video. Today, we about to watch Lake Seneca, my fault. Lake Seneca's darkest secret. This is why lakes are not safe. Alright, so looks like we're gonna be learning something new about bodies of water that we ain't know before. So, yeah, without further ado, we're gonna get into the video.
Something strange is lurking beneath Lake Seneca's surface, and it's said to have existed there for thousands of years. Seneca is just one lake of...
Hold on. I'm not even sure. Nah, I was about to say Loch Ness Monster, but I'm pretty sure the name of that um area is the Loch Ness. So yeah, that's a dub. Only other things that I've heard of, like myths, mythical creatures that's like in bodies of water, is probably Leviathan, Kraken, and yeah. Well, the megalodon was a historic creature. It really did exist, so it's not really a mythology. But I digress. I guess we just gotta learn.
Several that we will cover in this episode where strange things lurk beneath the surface. You won't want to miss this one. On July 14th, 1899, Captain Carlton S. Herendine stood at the helm of a paddle steamer called Otetiani as it made its way across Lake Seneca in New York. The lake itself had always been a source of mystery because long...
Damn, that's in New York. The more you know.
Before any European settlers had arrived in the area, local Native American tribes would tell stories about this body of water. Deep beneath the surface lived what they called a fierce beast. Most people dismiss these stories as folklore, as tall tales passed down through generations, but something happened in the summer in 1899. Something that would prove that these stories were based on something very real. Around 7 p.m., the Otetiani was filled with passengers enjoying a pleasant evening cruise across the lake. Captain Herendine and his bosun, Frederick Rose, were chatting casually when they both noticed something strange in the water about 365 meters ahead of them. At first, they thought they were looking at an overturned boat. It was dark in color, about 15 or so feet long, with what appeared to be a very sharp prow right at one end and a long, narrow stern at the other. So Captain Herendine first thought that there had been some kind of accident. He immediately ordered the steamer to slow down and adjust course. If there were people in the water, they needed to get to them fast. But as the crew prepared to lower their rescue boat, something very strange happened. This overturned boat suddenly began moving through the water, and not in the random way that debris gets pushed around by wind and waves. This was deliberately sailing in a specific direction. So Captain Herendine, now totally confused by what he was seeing, steered the Otetiani to follow this strange object. And that's when everyone on board got the shock of their lives. The narrow front end of what they thought was a boat suddenly opened up, revealing 2 rows of razor-sharp white teeth. And Captain Herendine would later describe that what they were actually looking at was far bigger than they'd initially thought. This thing was nearly 25 feet long, with a massive tail that tapered down right before widening at the end like a whale's. He estimated it to be somewhere around 1,000 pounds, but...
Yo, one thing about this guy, he's mad descriptive with the way he explains, so you could visualize. I feel like I said that in another video, but yeah, he's mad descriptive to where you could visualize exactly what it is that he's talking about. So just wanted to point that out.
What caught everyone's attention the most was its head, about 4 feet long and triangular, with a mouth full of teeth that looked like a bizarre mix of a shark's and a sperm whale's. And the creature's body was what appeared to be covered in some thick armor-like plating similar to a tortoise shell. And even the color was odd. It was like this strange brownish color with a green tint. Though when they caught glimpses of its underbelly, they could see it was creamy white, and its eyes were perfectly round like a fish's, but they never seemed to blink. And even for this captain who had been sailing these waters for years, had never seen anything like this. Perhaps it was the adrenaline pumping through his system, or it was just pure instinct, but he made a decision right then and there that would sound crazy to anyone who wasn't there. He immediately ordered his crew to speed up the steamer. He was gonna ram this thing head on. He gave the order, told the crew to prepare all their life.
It's probably not going to end well. I mean, I would just probably steer clear, bro. Because you just said it has armored plating. It seems like. I don't even see the point. But I mean, I guess.
Saving equipment. He wasn't stupid. I mean, he knew that trying to ram what appeared to be some kind of prehistoric monster might not exactly end well for the steamer either. In fact, the Washington Weekly Post would later publish an incredibly detailed account of what happened next. The Otetiani backed away to get some distance, then turned around to line up its attack. When Captain Herendeen gave the signal for full speed ahead, you could feel the tension on the deck. Every passenger stood there watching as this thing seemed to have crawled straight out of their worst nightmares. Whatever was in the water was smarter than they expected, because as the
mean swam? I don't think a creature like that could crawl if it wanted to. But maybe, you never know. As fins could make it possible.
steamer charged forward, it looked like right at them. Almost like it knew exactly what they were trying to do, and at the last possible second, it dove under the water, and the Otetiani passed right over where it had been, and some passengers would later swear they could see its dark outline moving beneath the surface, just as the steamer was about to continue on its regular.
Yeah, you probably gonna feel it too in a second.
route, a woman's scream cut through the air. Everyone turned to look where she was pointing, and there it was. It had surfaced again about 50 yards away, almost exactly where it had first disappeared under the water.
Well, that's one of the first times a scream was actually reasonable, I should say. Like, people just be, or I've witnessed a lot of movies and shows, people just be screaming, or women just be screaming, and it's not adding or changing anything about the situation. Like, but I digress.
This time, though, Captain Herendeen changed his strategy because instead of trying to hit the thing head on, he maneuvered the Otetiani so the starboard paddle wheel would catch it right in the middle of its body. Now, the steamer picked up speed again, but
why don't they just leave it alone? Like, yeah, clearly provoking it. I don't think it's doing nothing to ya. But yeah, I guess you trying to, you rather be safe than sorry, I guess. But I wouldn't do anything to it, but it's not even doing nothing to you. That don't make sense to me.
unlike before, the creature didn't notice the danger this time, and maybe it was tired, maybe it didn't expect them to return for round two, but the impact that followed was this loud, horrible, dull thud that everyone heard and felt deep in their bones. The force of the collision was so violent that passengers were thrown across the deck like ragdolls. And for a terrifying moment, the steamer itself nearly capsized. If it hadn't been for the crew's quick action, it probably would have. Now, what followed was perhaps the most terrifying moment of the entire ordeal. Complete and utter silence fell over the ship. The only sound was the steady chug of the engine. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. They all just stood there waiting to see what would happen next. And then they saw it. This large shape was just floating beside the ship with a massive hole torn in its side. In what would be its final moments, it lifted its head one last time, made what witnesses described as a sound like a sigh, and then went still. The impact of the ship had broken its spine. The monster of Lake Seneca was dead. But things weren't over yet. The crew quickly lowered a boat and began to try to secure the carcass with hooks and ropes. Everyone on board pitched in to help haul this impossible thing out of the water. They had most of it clear of the surface for a brief moment, but then everything just went wrong. The rope near the tail suddenly slipped, and that massive tail section dropped back into the water, and the sudden weight shift was too much. The other ropes started sliding through people's hands no matter how hard they tried to hold on, and within seconds, they had no choice but to let go, and the entire carcass splashed back into the lake. As soon as that body touched the water, it began to sink. The spot where it went down was over 600 feet deep, and as everybody knew all too well, anything that sank that deep in Lake Seneca never came back up. They all just stood there helplessly, watching their proof of this incredible encounter disappear into the black depths forever. But before it sank, several very credible people had gotten a good look at it. These weren't just random passengers. We're talking about Albert L. Fowl and D.W. Hallenbeck, both public works officials. George C. Schell, who was a police commissioner, Fred S. Bronson, who managed the Geneva Telephone Company, Charles E. Kuhn, a Philadelphia business salesman, and even a professor named George R. Elwood, who's a geologist from Ontario. And so when newspapers across America started running this story, there was endless speculation about what this could have been. And Professor Elwood had seen it with his own eyes and had a pretty interesting theory. He believed it might have been a Cladastes, which is an extinct prehistoric sea lizard from the mosasaur family. He figured these creatures could have survived by hiding in the underwater caves and tunnels that kind of honeycomb at the bottom of Lake Seneca. Other people thought it might be some kind of whale that had somehow made its way into the lake, or perhaps a giant fish, or even a massive turtle. Some believed it was something completely new to science, but whatever it was, after that day in 1899, it was never seen again. Those old Native American legends about a fierce beast living in Lake Seneca, well, maybe they weren't just stories after all. Maybe that creature the Otetiani ran that summer evening was the last of its kind, the final proof of something that had lived in those waters for thousands of years. And now it rests somewhere in the depths of that lake, and for all we know, there could be more hiding in those underwater caves. I mean, after all, Lake Seneca still holds plenty of mysteries, and sometimes, as this story proves, the most unbelievable legends have a grain of truth. On a cold morning in 1989, a pilot named Don Maxwell was doing what he loved most, flying his small aircraft over Lake Storsjön in Sweden. Don lived in Jamland, the region surrounding this massive lake, and would often take these early morning flights just to enjoy the pristine wilderness below.
Yo, that looks like a nice lake. Like, that was a nice picture right there.
Like everyone who grew up in the area, Don had heard all the stories about Storstuchare, which is the legendary monster that supposedly lived in the depths of Lake.
Yo, that looked like if a crocodile and a hippo had a baby. Man.
Storsjön. The tales describe this massive serpent-like creature stretching over 30.
I was about to say it kind of looked like a snake too, like a anaconda or something, but like Tom's 5 the head.
feet long with multiple humps along its back. And Don would look down at the dark waters during his flight and wonder if these stories had any truth to them. But he was a practical, professional pilot who dealt with facts and reality. And the idea of some sort of prehistoric beast hiding in a Swedish lake seemed pretty far-fetched. And so Don was there, cruising at a relatively low altitude over the lake, enjoying how the early morning sun kind of just sparkled off the calm surface, and the water was like glass, totally still and peaceful. But then, something large moved and began to churn and bubble, indicating something massive was rising up from the depths. Don began to watch in disbelief as an enormous dark shape emerged from the water, and at first, he tried to rationalize what this could have been, and thought maybe it was a submarine, even though he knew there shouldn't be any submarines in this lake. But as the shape continued to rise, he made out 5 distinct humps trailing behind what appeared to be a massive head. And as Don stared down from his cockpit, his rational mind desperately tried to understand what he saw. But any logical explanation evaporated the moment he noticed something impossible. These kind of fine whisker-like hairs protruding from this thing's front hump. This was clearly no submarine. This was something alive, and it continued to rise until its full form was visible through the crystal clear morning air. What he saw nearly made his heart stop. It looked like something out of medieval folklore, a massive serpentine beast with multiple segments rising out of the water. Its head alone was enormous, and as Don watched, frozen in his seat, it began to breathe in quick, aggressive bursts that disturbed the water's surface. And then, it turned its massive head upward and locked eyes with his plane. And at that moment, Don felt this primal fear, like he was staring at something that
Kinda, um, that kind of alludes to that one Godzilla. Yeah, or
existed from thousands of years ago. This thing let out this thunderous hiss that kind of just echoed across the lake, and his hands began to shake on the controls. He had never been that scared before in his life, but in that very moment, he genuinely thought he might lose control of the craft and crash right there. But his survival instincts kicked in. He forced himself to tear his gaze away from this thing below and focus entirely on his instrument panel. And his hands trembled so badly he had to grip the controls with all of his strength, and he knew that if he looked down again and allowed himself to think about what was lurking in the water beneath, he might panic completely. And so Don pointed his plane toward the shoreline where he'd taken off. He maintained a death grip on the controls, refusing to let his eyes drift downward even for a second. The thought of that thing watching him from below, perhaps even capable of who knows what, was almost too much to bear. All he could think about was getting back to solid ground. When he finally landed at the small airstrip, he just sat in his cockpit for a long time. He wasn't exactly sure what he had just witnessed. He didn't know who he would talk to, and he knew people wouldn't believe him. They'd say he was drunk or hallucinating or just making up stories, but he knew darn well he was sober, and the image of this thing was burned into his memory forever now. This experience changed Don forever. The professional pilot who'd once dismissed the legends of lake monsters as silly as folklore became a true believer. What he'd once written off as impossible now seemed entirely plausible. Don still flies over Lake Storshone these days, but with a very different perspective. When he's not in the air, he can often be found on the shore with binoculars or a telescope scanning the water's surface, but his attitude towards the lake's mysterious inhabitant has changed completely. Don's encounter alone has become one of the most compelling modern sightings of this creature. His story, at least to those who know Don, know that he is a reputable, level-headed professional pilot, and they find it harder to simply wave that away. Unfortunately, whatever it was he truly saw that morning in 1989 will remain a mystery.
yeah.
On a sunny afternoon in July of 1960, a team of U.S. Navy specialists stood aboard a small research vessel floating in the middle of Lake Chelan in Washington state. They'd been sent to this massive body of water to test their newest sonar equipment, stretching 88 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide. At this point, Lake Chelan was already a hugely popular tourist destination. Thousands of visitors flocked to its waters every year for fishing, boating, and water recreation. And the Navy team was actually pretty excited about this assignment because Lake Chelan is the largest natural lake in all of Washington, and testing their equipment here made perfect sense. So they lowered their advanced sonar system into the water and began taking readings. But something strange happened. The team couldn't get any echo readings back from their equipment, so they tried again and again and again, but every single time the sonar would just show nothing. It was like the lake had no bottom at all. And the lead technician was very confused by this. He knew their equipment was working perfectly. They had just tested it the day before, and so he thought to himself, this doesn't make any sense. The average depth was supposed to be around 114 meters, and the maximum around 453, but their sonar wasn't registering anything at all. Now at this point, one of the local guides on the boat spoke up, and what he told the Navy
Hmm. I don't know if you that sonar usually shows like whatever technological vessels are in the area. So if you're not getting that, you all know what it is, man. Like it's a organic being, to say the least, or it's not made out of technology. At least the technology, excuse me, that you could um track. So it's not too many things it could be.
would make them question everything they thought they knew about Lake Chelan. That everyone around here has known for generations that this lake has no bottom, and that even the tribes had given this body of water a name that translated to Deep Lake because of this mystery. And apparently, during periods of extreme drought when the water levels would drop dramatically, no one had ever seen the lake's bottom. It was like this body of water just kept going down forever. In fact, a researcher named Henry Persona was so intrigued by these stories that in 1960 he published an article in Western Folklore documenting all the local legends about this lake. And what he found was pretty disturbing. The native tribes didn't just talk about the lake being bottomless, they talked about something living down there in the depths. According to their stories, an extensive network of underwater caves existed deep beneath the surface of this lake. In these caves lived what they called a water beast, a massive creature that would emerge from the depths to attack anyone who disrespected this lake. And the tribes took this so seriously that they rarely used boats and absolutely avoided fishing in certain areas. So when the European settlers first arrived in the area, they actually laughed at these stories and they thought they were just silly superstitions. But then the attacks started happening. The first reports came from farmers who had lost livestock near the shoreline, and they would describe finding these massive bite marks on their animals, or sometimes their animals would just completely disappear. Then people started seeing something in the water, and one of the earliest documented settler encounters happened when a group of farmers were moving cattle along the shoreline, and they described seeing what looked like a massive crocodile-like creature, except it was way bigger than any crocodile they'd ever heard of. The thing came onto the beach, and one of their cows was grabbed and dragged back into the water. What's interesting is that different
Damn, son. Had the iron grip and was big enough paws to grab the cow and drag it back into the water. Like, you gotta be some. You gotta be pretty big to do that. Like, cows are bigger than us. Oh, well, generally speaking. The average cow is bigger than the average human. So just imagine how big that creature has to be.
Witnesses described two totally different kinds of creatures. Some people, like farmers, would say they saw this huge crocodilian creature, but others would describe seeing something that looked more like Scotland's Loch Ness Monster, this thing with a really long neck that would rise up out of the water, or a plesiosaur. Initially, people figured that
Oh,
witnesses were
what?
just making this stuff up. I mean, how could this be possible? How could there be two different creatures doing this? But then things began to take place in the summer of 1965. There was a local fisherman named Bill Crawford, and he was on his boat near the middle of the lake. And he had been fishing this spot for nearly 20 years, and of course, knew all the best spots to fish. And on that morning, everything was totally calm, which made it perfect for fishing, when suddenly, something massive surfaced right next to his boat. And Bill would later tell the local newspaper that what he saw was easily 30 feet long and had these dark eyes that looked up right at him, and its head alone was the size of his boat's motor. But it didn't thrash around like you'd
Crazy
expect from a
work.
giant fish or a reptile. Instead, it moved with this bizarre precision, like it was studying him, and moved around the boat, and before he could react, it just disappeared down beneath the surface. But instead of just swimming away, it went down vertically like an elevator. And Bill said he watched the water churn where it descended for nearly 5 minutes. Here's something very interesting to think about. Lake Chelan sits on top of one of the most complex underwater cave systems in all of North America. Geological surveys have shown that these caves stretch deep into the surrounding mountains, creating a massive network of underwater tunnels and chambers that even modern technology can't fully map. And so suddenly, all these strange reports started making sense. The Navy's sonar couldn't get a reading because, in many spots, it wasn't hitting a solid bottom. It was shooting straight into these cave openings. And this is exactly why the local tribes had always said the lake had no bottom. And in
Oh, I guess that's another explanation for it too. But yeah.
certain areas, they were right. The cave system also explains why people saw what looked like different creatures. When this beast emerged from different cave openings, people caught glimpses of it from different angles, and sometimes they'd see just the head and neck coming up, making it look like a plesiosaur. Other times they'd see its full body crawling onto the shore, giving it that crocodilian appearance. Despite all of our modern technology and numerous attempts to explore these caves, no one has been able to definitively prove or disprove the existence of these things. The caves are simply too vast and too deep to fully explore. Interestingly, the local tribes never seemed surprised by our inability to solve this mystery. In fact, one of the tribal elders said something along the lines of, "Some things aren't meant to be found. That creature has been there since our ancestors first came to these waters, and it'll be there long after we're gone." And because you guys made it this far, I want you to comment below what lurks beneath, so that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy storytelling of the mysterious and supernatural, then what are you waiting for? Slap that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. As always, never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll catch you all in the very next episode. Something
Alright, so that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I enjoyed. Um, I'm grateful for whoever made it to this part of the video where we at right now. Um, yeah, I hope you guys having a good day or night whenever this is reaching you. And yeah, like, subscribe, leave a comment in the comment section. I want to know, do you believe in certain things like what was described just now? The Loch Ness Monster, stuff like that, mythologies. Do you believe in those? And why? Or have you ever experienced seeing something of this like caliber or what? I'm curious to know. And I would really appreciate um if you would comment that. But yeah, that's about it for the video. And yeah.